Meet Reed Lance Rosenthal, rancher, #1 best-selling, award-winning author, and unabashedly, unapologetically on the right side of the outstanding issues of our generation. But don't try to fence him in. Sometimes his positions will surprise you, because Reed is definitely his own man, with his own opinions. You might love him, you might hate him, but you won't be able to stop listening. Step over to the right side with Reed.
Howdy, listeners and viewers from coast to coast, the Gulf to the 51st state, and around the globe. This is Reed Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio and on the Cowboys Take on video channels everywhere. And please, pass this link on to somebody who you think needs to hear it or ought to hear it. Hit that like, hit that subscribe, ring the little ring-a-ding-ding bell so you know when they come out, since I'm not, by the minute or by the hour or by the day. And we will bring you lots of news that nobody else brings you. And with the new format of the show, a lot of forward thinking that very few people, if any, are bringing you. It's all a big chess game out there. 4-dimensional chess, and lots of people are playing checkers, particularly the lamestream media, I might add. All right, so today, first of all, I went down and visited my soon-to-be 102-year-old mom, who's a cutie pie, and spent a few days down there. Got back, ready to do a show, and then, the news is a cascade, a torrent, a waterfall, a flood, a tsunami. So every time I got ready to do a show here the last few days, something else would occur that would change the whole tenor of the show. So anyway, here we are. I'm going to be bringing you another show over the weekend, and that's going to be the real estate show I've been threatening here for 3 or 4 weeks. I'm still doing research on it because that too, the real estate markets, whether it's rural land, whether it's farm and ranch, whether it's residential, urban, residential, rural, is changing literally by the day, as you shall see. And pretty much not for the better, I might add. Today, however, we're going to be talking about Iran. And I don't mean what's going on and who's bombing who and how many missile launchers were taken out. And you got all that stuff. And as usual, we're going to have a boatload of articles and videos on the website. And I would love your comments on how you like the new categories we have for the news articles. We've updated them quite a bit, as I told you over the last 2 shows, and some key videos, both on economics and Iran, and a few Iran videos which will give you the blow-by-blow of supposedly what's happening over there. But Iran is a much bigger, huge piece in the global structure in all sorts of ways. Geopolitical power, military power, and economic power. And we're going to talk a little bit about the potential effects of Iran. Win, lose, draw, whatever it's going to be. And it's not a question of losing for the United States. I mean, we can't lose militarily, but there's lots of other ways we can lose. And I'm going to give you a quote, which I think sums up the thrust of today's show. And by the way, I'm going to have some other stuff for you too. I mean, some court stuff and some lamestream media, rah, the enemy, boo, America stuff. You're just going to shake your head. But it all ties into the big picture and the potential future. But our quote today, and deservedly so, is from Niccolo Machiavelli. And for those of you who don't know that name, he was a very, I wouldn't call him sinister, but I would call him a dark pragmatist, lived during the Renaissance, a philosopher, very famous. And he's the guy who came up with Never Wound a Prince, which also kind of figures into what's happening in Iran right now. All right. So, Niccolo Machiavelli. Wars begin when you will, but they do not end when you please. Think about that just a little bit. Okay. First of all, why don't we start off with the liberal press, which is basically almost the entire mainstream media, and a number of quote unquote alternative media outlets also. And you know what? I got ahead of myself. Let's start with the rant story. How's that? Then we'll go to the lamestream media because we might as well have something fun before we get into something distasteful. So, over the last 2 weeks, last week, we had 70 degree, 75-degree, almost 80-degree weather in Wyoming in March. Dry as a bone. I've been telling you about it. And then we had 2 days of snow, 10 inches. It was great. I mean, it's the first real moisture we've had for months. And it was wet, so it was good. It was almost a full inch of precipitation. It melted, of course, in a day and a half with strong winds and a reascent to 70 degrees. You know, this is the land of extremes. Nothing can ever be kind of normal. It's going to be one extreme or the other. And I have some pictures here that will go with the ranch story. One is of the storm and some elk, which were wandering around, driven down by the, gee, woohoo, one decent snowfall we have had all winter. Wow. Second time we have plowed all winter. That'll kind of give you an idea in Wyoming in the mountains. And now we are gearing up, and you'll have to excuse my attire here, but I'm in out of the field. We're gearing up water 5 to 6 weeks early, ahead of schedule. Our pivot's been on for almost a week and a half, which is unheard of. Normally we don't start it till May 1, but we have the water because of our reservoir system, and we're going to use it because I'm not too sure what's going to be happening come July. But I don't think it's going to be, why don't we say I don't think it's going to be a water fest. It won't be a water park. How's that? And I don't know what the other poor folks are doing for water who don't have our storage set up, but it's not going to be a pleasant year in the Midwest and at least the east slope of the Rockies. I will tell you more about that, I think, this weekend show when we're talking about real estate because it really kind of ties in. I have some theories about what's going on, which you may think might be tinfoil hat, but I think they'll ring a chime for you, and I'm going to have some older shows of mine posted having to do with weather manipulation. There's a hint for you. Now let's go to lamestream media. So the New Yorker, right, that bastion of liberal print, non-thinking liberal print, they, along with other liberal rags, have been ragging, no pun intended, on the United States military, Trump, which is, of course, no surprise. They all suffer from derangement syndrome. And America's, shall we say, moral base. How's that? These are the same outfits that said men are women and women are men and they're interchangeable and trans is great and, you know, kids indoctrination is terrific and whatever, just to give you a little background. But the New Yorker published an article, and this also got into some of the other rags. And the article was a quote, supposedly, or quotes from a guy by the name of Vali Nasser. He's a professor, and he his claim to fame is the Iran grand strategy. He's also an Islamist. In fact, you could call him a educational Islamic radical. And it was written by a gal by the name of, and I probably mispronounce it, oh well, Azak Mavani. And basically, the article was conjured out of thin air, but it talked about how Trump and the inner circle at the White House are referring to the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, who, if the total picture in Iran comes to play and the Iranian people gain their freedom from the Islamic terrorists that have run the country for 47 years, by the way, originally installed by MI6. Thank you, Britain. Um, Supposedly, Trump is calling the Crown Prince, whom he's met with a number of times. They have a great relationship, from what I can see on the screen. The loser prince behind the prince's back. Oh my! You think they're trying to sow some seeds of discord here? Because Azat, who's a gal, um, she is of Iranian descent. She's an American, but she's also, imagine this, a radical Islamist. In fact, she's one of the head honchos in the Islamic Republic propaganda arm in the United States. So, anyway, according to these two birds and the lamestream media, um, all the elections in Iran have been, in fact, free and fair. The vast majority of people in Iran support the Islamic terrorist republic. And as a little bit more background for these guys, the Vali Nasser, the professor, was, yes, he was a consultant to and advisor to the State Department under, guess which president? You're right, Obama, Barack Hussein Obama. And his father was an Islamist revolutionary and a communist and a mullah. So this is the kind of thing, and I'm picking on this one article as a blatant, glaring example. But no matter what you are listening to, or who you are listening to, or what the medium is, whether it's YouTube, it's alternative media, whether it's print media, whether it's mainstream, lamestream media, you got to take everything with a grain of salt, folks. And then you throw AI into this, and there's all sorts of crapola going on by all sides. You really got to pick and choose your facts. The big fact in Iran, and never mind how many bombings there have been and how many buildings we've taken out and how many IRGC have been killed and whether or not, as Iran claimed the other day, they shot down an F-18, which they didn't. There's a video. None of that, it all matters. Don't get me wrong. It matters a lot to the troops that are involved in each situation. But the big picture is the Straits of Hormuz. Period. The Straits of Hormuz. Forget about everything else that's going on over there. Whether or not the people will be armed and they'll rise up and throw out the regime, all the other chatter. There's other important things. The 460 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, which supposedly is buried somewhere out there. I'm not making light of them. But what matters right now is the Straits of Hormuz. The Straits of Hormuz are an economic choke point for the entire world. Ironically, less so for America and for Israel than almost any other country on the planet. America is energy independent. In a way, Israel is too, and Israel knows it can get the goods from America. Both have ample food. Israel has a potential problem with that. But this is not what's happening in the rest of the world. Okay. You have, just as an example, and this is changing by the day, it's worsening. Okay. You have fuel rationing now occurring in a number of countries around the world, including the morons in the European Union who brought this on themselves by, thinking the rotor blades out there are going to create the power and the sunshine in cloudy Europe is going to, take care of everything. And let's shut down our nuclear plants and no more fossil fuels because we don't want to contaminate the earth. Let's listen to Greta. But that's not the case. Okay, number one, the fertilizer shortage is hitting everybody, including, by the way, American agriculture. Fuel rationing, whether it's diesel, particularly diesel, because diesel drives trucks and trucks deliver goods, right? Gas. You have in Africa 3 countries now who are curtailing electrical production because most of their electrical production is done in some way, shape, or form off of fossil fuels. Slovenia, right, part of the EU, and the EU itself are rationing gas. And you have China's production capabilities, while not crippled, have been curtailed. So China can't produce and China can't sell, and that is not great for their already kind of wobbly economy. We've talked about it in previous shows. You have all sorts of things happening throughout the world that are tangential but directly linked to the Straits of Hormuz. And no matter how this war goes, the bombs and the missile launchers and whatever, we'll call it the day-to-day of the war, this war will not be resolved, and how it will be resolved is solely contingent on the Straits of Hormuz. Iran, the Iranian regime, is in many ways a cornered and perhaps mortally, but certainly severely wounded animal. And desperate regimes and desperate countries and desperate people do desperate things. And Iran has as much as stated that their intent is to create havoc in the world economy, to create as much angst out there throughout the entire planet that there'll be pressure brought to bear on the United States and Israel to cease or whatever might be advantageous to what's left of the Iranian regime. This is a regime, by the way, who is now incorporating 12 to 15-year-olds in its armed forces and forcing them to man checkpoints within the cities because they are scared to death of the 95% of the Iranian population that wants to oust their sorry butts. So this will kind of give you an idea, I think, and probably a lot of things that you haven't seen or heard. And there's more in the videos on the website on the rightsideradio.com. They are under World War III kinetic, World War III economic. The really, really good ones are under the audio bar and under the other categories. And I suggest that you watch them. You'll find them fascinating, and they'll give you a perspective that you are really not getting anywhere else. How quickly the Straits of Hormuz are opened, and in what way they are opened, and whether or not they remain open and relatively risk-free to transit, is now the key period. Not everything else is secondary. And there's some interesting things that come from the situation in the Straits, which is pretty much closed, other than to Iranian tankers bringing oil to China. They're given transit, and the American Navy, 3 carriers strong, although the Ford is in repairs right now for their laundry fire, but 3 carriers strong isn't stopping Chinese ships or Iranian ships carrying Chinese oil, which is all being paid for, by the way, in yuan, not dollars. Now, why would that be? You've probably heard something, and you'll hear more in the videos and such that are on the website, about Russia assisting Iran with targeting. I mean, there's been some pretty extensive damage done to American bases in the Mideast with rather precise targeting, and that's all come from Russian satellites and Russian intelligence sharing. So I want to ask you a question. I want you to think about this. You have the American Navy, biggest, most powerful Navy on the planet. You have an immense array of naval power, which is standing 600 miles, 1,000 kilometers off the Iranian coast to not get drones and missiles. And they're allowing Chinese oil to transit in Iranian ships when they know that the only source of revenue that Iran has, and with no money, your war effort kind of collapses, and you don't have money to give to Hezbollah or Hamas or the Houthis, they're allowing them to transit. They're not stopping Iranian ships. They're not stopping Chinese ships. Well, why is that? Why have we not seen some type of retribution to Russia? And instead, understandably from an economic standpoint, as to quasi-allies, instead, the lifting of sanctions on Russia so that it can now deliver oil to India, to China, and to others at a higher price. I want to suggest something to you, but I want you to think about it. And that is because we are in a paradigm shift over what the word power signifies. Yes, we got the biggest Navy. Yes, we have the best military. Yes, we can inflict incredible damage in an incredibly short period of time in overwhelming manner to anybody we please. But in the days of drones and missiles and satellites, it is interesting that a land-based power, Iran, is holding off the biggest navy on the planet. And the biggest navy on the planet is not interfering with Iranian allies, should we say, economic flow, or Iran's economic flow. And that's because there's another power at play, the power of economics and the power of geopolitics. And I want you to think about what conversations may have transpired between Washington and Beijing relative to this Chinese oil. What conversations do you think have occurred between Washington and Moscow on the relaxation of sanctions and allowing Russian oil to transit at a higher price during the continuation of the Ukraine war? Whether or not there's been discussions with Iran, I don't know. Iran says no, Trump says yes. They have or there haven't been. Doesn't matter because Iran isn't going to make a deal anytime soon. I'm going to bring you back to Machiavelli's quote, right? War begins when you will, but wars do not end when you please. Obviously, the Trump administration wants this war done. They want their military objectives achieved, particularly relative to potential current or future Iranian weapons and nuclear weapons. And they want or Iranian proxies, the Houthis and Hamas and Hezbollah, crippled so that they can't threaten either shipping, which both the Houthis and Hezbollah can, and so that they can't threaten Israel because it's less problems for the United States in the future, the more Israel is less threatened, if you follow me. But this is all 4D chess. And this 4D chessboard of economics, geopolitics, the, should we say, balance of power, both economic and military, between the three superpowers, Russia, the United States, and China, and between the lesser powers, Israel, Hezbollah, Lebanon, Iran, are all a balance. And that balance in today's world is a limit to your military. No matter how big it is, no matter how powerful, no matter how proficient, and we are impressive, but there's more to it. This is not World War II anymore. And I might add that in World War II, we, literally America, won the war, not because we had a bigger army and we had this, that, and the other. We won the war because we could outgun and out-manufacture anybody else. It's simple as that. We had more money and we had more manufacturing. That's what won the war. And that World War II scenario is what begins the paradigm shift that we have now with the advancement of technology and AI and all these different weapons and standoff attacks, where you can launch a missile 2,000 miles to take out a target almost with pinpoint accuracy, particularly if you're Iran and you have the Russians helping you. This is a whole different planet. And how this is all going to come out, I don't know. But I do know that the Straits of Hormuz need to be opened. They need to be relatively safe and risk-free, and it needs to happen soon. Time is not an ally of the United States and Israel when it comes to the Straits of Hormuz. There's too much damage being done globally that will have other adverse impacts. Some of them we can't even foresee. And economic impacts, some of those we can foresee. Debt, money printing, you name it. So I want you to think about this in a big picture. Step away from how many bombs were dropped, how many buildings were blown up, how many IRGC generals were killed. That's all great. That's part of the day-to-day of the war. But there's a much bigger picture at play here. And how this comes out will shape things on the domestic scene politically, economically, and it will shape our international relations for years to come. It will also shape, and here's the rock and the hard place, remember Machiavelli's quote, how our power is perceived by everybody else on the planet. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is that the lion attacks the mouse and the mouse roars back and the mouse survives. Because all the other mice are no longer afraid of the lion. And that has huge ramifications. Some of them are playing out right now in Cuba, which is really on its last wobbly legs. And I think Cuba will, quote unquote, fall. There's several videos on the website on the rightsideradio.com about that, too, under international, and I think one or two under the audio bar. But more than half the population in Cuba is in the streets. They burned the Communist Party headquarters over the last week. There's no fuel. There's no fuel because Washington has, rightfully so, cut off all the oil going from Venezuela to Cuba. And Raul Castro, who is a scumbag communist crook, skimmer of money and power from his own people, he is supposedly in talks with the Trump administration, probably to save his own skin and to get out of there with as many stolen assets as he can. I think the outcome in Cuba is probably going to be quite good. And I think the outcome in Venezuela has so far been exceptional. The outcome in Iran is in doubt, and it goes back to the Straits of Hormuz. Think about the really, really, really big picture ramifications of what happens if we don't get the straits open, if we only get them partially open, or if in some way, shape, or form we get them open. It's a really big difference, a big divergence in how the chessboard is, or the pieces on the chessboard, the global chessboard, are going to move in the future. In other news, yes. By the way, along those lines, while you're thinking about all this, think about why China has been quiet on Iran, why Russia has said very little, other than the usual public indignation on Iran. There's a lot of quiet power floating around back halls around the globe right now, folks. A lot of quiet power. Election fraud. I've told you about the SAVE Act. This has to be passed. This is as basic as it gets. You can't register to vote if you're not an American, a U.S. citizen, and you can't vote without a picture ID. This is not difficult stuff. I gave you the example in the last show of Kami Mandami, in New York, requiring 2 forms of photo ID for people who wanted to shovel snow for $28 an hour. This is the same Mandami and the rest of the Democratic Communist crew who now objects to registration only if you're a United States citizen and picture ID when you vote. Okay. Never mind that almost 80%, way over 70% of the American public, right, left, or middle, supports the SAVE Act, which is basically picture ID. I'll make it as simple as I can be. The rhinos in Congress, well, to be fair to the House, they passed it. It's been in the Senate. It's been held up in the Senate for a month by Rhino Thune, the Senate leader. I warned you about him when he became Senate leader. And other rhinos like Mitch McConnell, who's almost as feeble as Biden was. And Lisa Murkowski, who is Alaska, get rid of your ranked voting, who is unbelievable and vindictive, a real witch. And Thune has finally consented, because of the badgering of, shall we say, more American Republican senators than he is, to allow for a new form of filibuster debate, which is you got to limit your filibuster talk to the act. You can't be out there reading poetry from Shakespeare. And it's going to be televised and recorded, which is going to put the Democrats on the hot seat. I mean, can you imagine being a Democratic senator in, let's say, a purple state, standing up there and saying, well, no, I don't think, we should have picture ID to vote? Yeah. So it's pretty clever, really, but it wasn't Thune's idea. He's reluctantly putting it through. You need to write your senators. I don't care if you live in Massachusetts and your senator is Elizabeth friggin' Warren. Send her a letter and say, pass the SAVE Act, and whatever else you want to say. Along those lines, let me tell you about a little election fraud. There's been all sorts of election fraud discovered in the last 6 months, going back to 2020 or in the last election. But there's a Minnesota judge. This isn't just in the last week. Okay. He's an election judge. And he just pled guilty to allowing 11 illegal aliens vote in the last election in his township that he was the election judge of, and telling his people on the staff, the election folks, that they didn't have to prove that they were registered voters. And it's cool, if their name was Oshkosh, Washkosh, or whatever. So anyway, he is facing a prison term. But just think about how many election judges there are like that, particularly in blue states around the country. In LA, and the video The article is under election fraud and under the audio bar on the website on the rightsideradio.com. O'Keefe, right? Used to be Project Veritas. Now it's O'Keefe Media. Has an incredible video of actual corruption, the admissions of corruption in LA, where they are paying homeless people $2 and a cigarette to register to vote, having them forge documents in other people's names, make up addresses, etc., and then paying them to vote. But there's no election fraud, folks. There's no election fraud. You really gotta watch that video. And the SAVE Act won't cure it, but it'll go a long way to curing it. And the SAVE Act needs to be passed. I mean, yeah, Trump could do an executive order, but you know that's going to be challenged in court by those who like open borders and, shall we say, a blind eye to non-U.S. citizens voting in national elections. Also, under elections and donations, remember we got midterms coming. And what is always a tough row to hoe for a president in his first midterm is getting really difficult now. It's getting really difficult because of economy, because of the increase in gas prices. You know, most folks are concerned with the extra 50, 60, 70, whatever dollar that they're paying per gallon of gas in some type of temporary way right now. They're not thinking about how expensive it might be, or permanently expensive it might be, to try and recover from a nuclear blast. Iran has demonstrated they have 2,500-mile missiles, right? They launched on Diego Garcia. Who knows what else they might have? Who knows what they might be able to do even with a little bit of radioactive material strapped to a normal warhead for a dirty bomb. So, you know, being short-sighted, being a short-sighted American, you can complain about the 50 cents, the dollar, whatever. Okay, I don't like paying any more than you do. The diesel for my truck is $5 instead of $3.19. So I got it, and I don't like paying it. But there's a much bigger picture out there, folks, right? A much bigger picture. Under the election and donations section, and I think I have a few of them in the producers have a few of them in the under the audio bar area on the website on the rightsideradio.com. There's several different ways to contribute to Republican candidates. One is a 35X. If you put in $10, you just contributed $350 to the congressional campaigns. If you put in $50, you just contributed 50 times 35, you contributed over $2,000 to the midterms. There's another one in there for 15X. You put in $20, you've contributed $300. You put in $1,000, you've contributed $15,000, excuse me. This is really huge multiples, huge multiples. Take advantage of them. I mean, it's a lot of bang for your buck. Much better than sending out, you know, $10 donations here and $50. I mean, this is huge. And it goes to a number of candidates you'll see in the stuff we have posted. So I urge you, and pass that out to your friends and family so that they can take advantage of it too. It's a big deal. It's going to be a very, very, very tough election. And the next 2 years, what happens will hinge upon it. You know, one of the shows I'm going to bring you over here over the next several weeks is some of the policies that the Democratic Communists and the Democratic Communist Islamists, who are all banded together, and call themselves the Democratic Party, with very few exceptions. Fetterman from Pennsylvania being one of them. Wow, what a surprise. These guys great. You wouldn't even believe some of the policies that they're talking about. I mean, there's talk about raising the estate tax in some of the blue states to 50%, 50%, and dropping the threshold, which right now is, I believe, about 11.2 million or 13, right in that neighborhood nationally. And most states don't even have thresholds. But they're talking about dropping the threshold to, like $1 million. So, if you are a typical kind of middle class, slightly upper middle class American, and you've saved your whole life and you have $1 million or $2 million retirement account and you croak, you've already paid taxes on all that money, of course. They now want to tax you 50% to give to their social programs, to pay for lawyers to argue against voting with with IDs. This is not a good deal. Okay. Contribute. Get involved. Think ahead. The midterms, believe it or not, are only like 7 months away, right? November. The last thing I want to talk about is, and I've been ringing this chime for you the last 3 shows because it's getting bigger and bigger. It's that snowball I was talking about. It's getting bigger and bigger and rolling faster and faster down the hill. And that is private credit. They now think that between private credit and the derivatives of private credit, where things were tranched and sold out to banks all around the world, all sorts of things, that it could be as much as $52 trillion involved. $52 trillion. That's 1.5 times, give or take, the the GDP of the United States. That's a systemic problem, folks. It's not an isolated problem. And you need to be thinking, the latest one, by the way, is Apollo Debt Solutions. They just decided that they're not going to let people redeem their $15 billion in private credit. You need to think about that. Not as some far off thing, but as something that's here now and directly impacts you because it impacts the banks. And the banks is where most of us have most of our money. And what can happen with a systemic type problem like this is well documented in history, including, by the way, in this country in 1929 through 1932. You simply can't get your money out. It's even worse nowadays because you have the bail-in laws. Thank you, our buddy Obama. Where the bank, basically, the bank, you have an IOU. You don't have your money in the bank. And the federal regulators, so they can save their own little chicken butts, they can simply say, okay, well, this is a bail-in situation, and your money will be used to bail out the bank in which you had your deposits. I'm not making this up. I've published lots of articles on this. I've had shows on this. Go into the archives, just type in bail-in, and you can read them. So once again, really big picture. The private credit crisis is not going to resolve itself anytime soon. It's going to grow. And as it grows, the impacts will grow. And the impacts on you will become more pronounced. And you need to think about that now. Now, in this weekend show, a couple days from now, it's taking me about 2 months to research it. We're going to go over real estate because it's all part of this same mix. In fact, some of this private credit has to do with commercial real estate and investors buying residential real estate and agricultural properties. I mean, it's pervasive. And real estate has its own problems, never mind misvalued private credit or private credit which has seen a decrease in the values of collateral and all the problems that are going on in that sector. So tune in with me. I'll probably have it out to the producers either Saturday night or Sunday, and they'll publish it usually within 24 hours. And I think if you think about this show and the shows I've done with private credit, and you think about that show with real estate, and you think about what's happening in the Straits of Hormuz, I think a picture will start to develop. Whether or not that's the real picture of what happens in the future, nobody knows. But having that picture will certainly help you recognize it when it flashes on your screen. And you'd like to know what's going to come up on your screen long before it does, folks. Anyway, this is Reed Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio and the Cowboys Take. You have a great Friday or whatever day you're getting this. And Saturday, we will talk to you in a few days. And keep the wind at your back.
Please remember, if you've missed any shows, just click on Show Archive and you'll find all of his shows. We look forward to seeing you here again next week for another episode of Reed Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side.